Good evening. Welcome to our final lecture class meeting before we have our final exam next Thursday night. Next week is final exam week, and the college does go by a slightly altered schedule during final exam week for a lot of the exams. But for this class, we'll just be doing your third exam, just like the other two. I know I owe you guys a study guide. I am keenly aware of the fact, and it is towards the top of my to-do list of things to get done tomorrow. I'm sorry that I don't have it done yet. I've sort of had a lot of things piling up here. It always happens at the end of the semester, but I will get that done for you guys. So that exam will cover, to reiterate, from what you guys can already see on the schedule document, but just in case you're having trouble accessing that, as you can see here, uh, we just have tonight, and your reflection papers are also due at midnight, and I see that good half of you guys have already turned yours in, and I'm looking forward to reading those. And see, we got folks still entering. Good. So that third exam will cover a decent number of chapters: 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and 16. Those are all the chapters that we've covered since we've returned from spring break. We've covered a lot of ground, actually, since we've returned from spring break, a short period of time. Uh, but that would be nicotine, opioids, sedatives, steroids, stimulants, and tonight, our focus on the legal ramifications of drug use. And also, we're going to take a look at a A&E film that actually just came out a year or two ago. I've only actually seen a few clips from it. I haven't even seen the whole thing yet myself. So I'm really kind of actually excited to watch this tonight. A film that A&E produced called Acid, Spies, and Secret Experiments: America's War on Drugs. And this one will be a little bit longer, but we'll have the time because the slides that I have for you guys aren't that I don't have that many slides for you guys. I think I have like 16 or 17 slides for you guys tonight. But I think this is going to be an interesting piece. Uh, and again, a relatively recent, yeah, it just came out in 2017. So a little older than I thought it was, but still relatively recent. I haven't seen it yet. Uh, so I think we're going to see some interesting stuff there. And I bet I'll probably learn a thing or two from it myself. Uh, so let's go ahead and take Any questions, house cleaning questions? There are usually folks who have questions about things before I jump into the lecture, whether you have an exam question or anything that's uh, related to matters outside of the content tonight. Does anybody need to ask any particular questions or because um, once I start getting into the subject matter, it really does kind of derail me a little bit sometimes if we get a little off topic into like syllabi stuff. So I just wanted to see if there was anybody who yes, there will be a study guide for the final. I'm working on it, and I am going to aim to have that out for you guys tomorrow. Yep. Any other questions or concerns relating end of course matters? All right. And I'm anticipating the question, are you allowed to have your note cards like the first two exams on the final? Yes, you are. It's going to be the whole class period like before. It's going to be like the other two times that you did it. It's not a cumulative exam. You're not going to be retested on anything that you guys have already been tested on. And I am aiming to get your reflection papers graded pretty quickly here too. My goal is, I'm going to get that study guide written first, but once I get that done and get a few other things crossed off my to-do list, you guys will start to see reflection paper grades pop up. So if there aren't any other, let's see, will the study guide provide any extra points? I'm not sure. It's not going to, there's no extra credit for using the study guide or anything. It's just a guide that some people find helpful when studying for the exam. Someone asked me if there were extra points involved for using the study guide. No, I just think that you just might find it helpful to use it once I get it published. Any other items, concerns? I also want to say before I jump into the material that it has been a fun semester with you guys, and I hope you guys have gotten a lot out of the course. And if you guys want to come see me this summer or in the fall for any of the other classes I'll be teaching, I look forward to maybe seeing some of you guys again. Just keep in mind, I don't teach math classes, so if you see math classes with the name Carr on them, that is not me. That is Jeremy Carr. There are two Professor Carrs at Pensacola State. So I am not Jeremy. I do not teach math classes. All right, so let's go ahead and jump into the material, shall we? All right, there we go. So, kind of my objectives for this chapter are kind of getting you guys familiar with the five schedules of the Controlled Substances Act, which we've probably already talked about, I'm sure. Um, that's one of the biggest topics to be familiar with in this chapter. And also, some of the legal things to know if you or anybody that you care about is planning on being in possession of any sort of illegal substance anytime soon, or at any point in your life, you might be, uh, it might behoove you to be aware of kind of the general laws surrounding, possession of controlled substances and what the legal ramifications can be if you were in fact apprehended for doing that, right? Uh, both federally and at the state level. Uh, and we're going to just talk about general legal principles surrounding drug possession tonight. And we're also going to look at a film that looks at the history of the war on drugs, produced by A&E. I think it's going to be pretty good. Um, so while laws exist regarding the rights of a cop to search someone's car or home, And generally speaking, many, if not most, cops will abide by the law when it comes to searching people's cars. But in many cases, if a cop wants to search your car is going to get searched, whether you like it or not, in some way or fashion. Your greatest expectation of privacy is going to be in your home, followed by your car, and least when out in public. If a law enforcement officer suspects you of a crime and really wants to search your car, you will be searched, whether or not you give permission. If you give permission, the search will be legal. If you refuse, it may or may not be legal, but it's still going to happen. A person who is innocent of any crime but is with someone arrested for possessing drugs may become involved with the legal system until his or her innocence is proven. The penalties for drug related activities can be horrendous, especially in the United States federal judicial system, and particularly for selling drugs. Even possession of a modest amount can result in a charge of intent to sell. Make sure I don't have anybody else in the waiting room here. You don't have to be on government property to be in violation of federal law. Federal law applies everywhere in the United States and all U.S. territories at all times. State and federal laws can be extremely strict about the use of guns and the commission of crimes. Possession can add many years to a sentence. So when you add guns to the mix of a drug charge, that will amplify your legal troubles magnificently. Knowing a cop also, it won't always protect you, and in fact, usually won't. Honestly, in some cases, there are, there may be some sort of situations where knowing a law enforcement officer could legally benefit you. I won't lie that it can never happen. But as a general rule of thumb, having a friend that's a cop or a family member that's a cop isn't necessarily, going to protect you from the legal ramifications of possessing or selling drugs. And another thing to be quite mindful of is that when it comes to traveling abroad, right, uh, which is something I've only experienced once thus far in my life when I traveled to Morocco last summer. But when you travel abroad, all bets are off as what's going to happen to you if you get caught with drugs in a foreign country. Uh, you know, some of the really most undesirable um, places to be on the planet really are, in a lot of foreign jails in countries that don't necessarily have the same due process laws that are afforded to Americans. So, just some general age information here around, laws of how old you have to be to buy things. When I was younger, you had to be 18 to buy tobacco products, but I think it was just a few years ago that they upped it to 21. Um, and that now matches the age that you have to be to buy alcohol, and it's always been 21 to buy alcohol as long as I can remember in my life. Over-the-counter cold medicines, you have to be at least 18 and show your ID. So, medications like dextromethorphan and other over-the-counter medications that can be sedating and that can be abused, right? Anybody of any age can buy herbal drugs, believe it or not. A kid can go into to GNC if the child wants to and buy vitamin supplements or whatever, or even a lot of herbal supplements. There's nothing to prevent children from purchasing them. So, kind of the start of the show tonight is the Controlled Substances Act. And momentarily, I'm going to start our film, which is going to kind of tell the story of how it came into existence and, some of the history around all of that, right? And I think it's going to be fascinating to look at. But there are five schedules of the Controlled Substances Act, and as we have already discussed in this class, these schedules are not really based on any kind of current or sound science, right? Because we've already just been marveling at the fact, say, for example, that cannabis here, notice, is Schedule 1, right? No accepted medical use, they say, high potential for abuse. In the same category with heroin, right? And look, we've got amphetamines and potent stimulants uh, that arguably are more dangerous and more habit forming than cannabis, but they're more legal than cannabis. Look at that, right? And I know we've already talked about this, but Schedule 2 involves appropriate medical use with a high potential for abuse. So that would be opioids, your barbiturates, amphetamines, meth. Schedule 3 um, is where you see hydrocodone, uh, ketamine, testosterone. Schedule 3 is said to have a potential for abuse with low to moderate physical um, risk for dependence. Schedule 4, there's a potential for abuse, low potential for abuse rather with Schedule 4 would include your benzodiazepine drugs like Valium and Xanax and others. And then your Schedule 5 drugs, low potential to abuse, uh, preparations containing very small amounts of narcotics, like maybe cough syrup that has a tiny bit of codeine in it or something like that. Um, so that is the Controlled Substances Act scheduling system that is enforced by the federal government, specifically the Drug Enforcement Administration, the DEA, being the central federal agency involved in these processes of drug regulation. But of course, the FBI and other federal agencies can often become involved in this sort of stuff at the federal level. So let's go ahead and take a look at acid, spies, and secret experiments. You guys should be able to see that. Let me try that again. I'm having a little. There we go.
June 17th, 1971, Richard Nixon declares war on a new enemy. It's more dangerous than the mob. It's more of a threat than communism. They call it the war on drugs.
America's public enemy number one is drug abuse. Anytime you've got that massive amount of drugs flowing into one area, you're going to have war.
Goes out there.
It was the CIA that introduced LSD to the United States.
The agency is elbow deep with drug traffickers.
On deck, gentlemen.
Nobody knows Pablo Escobar was just a customer.
When you're making that kind of money and living outside the law, it's exciting as hell.
Bert, wow. Really? Is this your spokesperson?
Any questions?
And people want their government to get tough and to go on the offensive. 3 strikes, then you are.
It's time to stop the drugs from pouring into our country.
It's a war without end.
I do think that most Americans would be utterly shocked if they knew the depth of involvement that the Central Intelligence Agency has had in the international drug trade.
Every
11 years before the war on drugs is declared, the story begins here at Miami's Fontainebleau Hotel. It's a favorite spot for one of the era's most notorious gangsters. Santo Trafficante Jr., born into the powerful Sicilian mob, he's well known by the FBI as one of the world's biggest heroin traffickers.
Santo Trafficante Jr. at one point had 2 or 3 of the most popular casinos in Havana. He was running heroin out of there. These guys were powerful. They were able to get people killed.
But Trafficante is not here on vacation. He's here to meet with 2 CIA operatives.
What's interesting about the CIA and the Cold War and the war on drugs is that the CIA had so many shared interests with drug dealers and their modes of operation.
They're meeting in this hotel to plan the assassination of America's newest Cold War enemy.
Gentlemen, hey, good to meet you. How you doing? Good. I like that, gentlemen. I like that.
Just 2 years earlier, Havana was the Caribbean's Sin City. Santo Trafficante ran a vast criminal network with no fear of arrest, gambling, guns, and girls. But by far, the most lucrative product is heroin. Smuggled from the Middle East through Marseille, France, via Havana, and onto the United States. They call the route the French Connection.
The thing about Trafficante, and like so many of these wise guys, these mafia guys, they would always claim they weren't in the narcotics business. They could say, oh yeah, I killed 15 guys, but I never dealt heroin, which was just like, oh, okay. The fact of the matter is that they've been involved in the heroin trafficking from the beginning.
Trafficante made Havana the center of his drug trafficking empire by paying off Cuba's president, Fulgencio Batista. The corrupt dictator also happened to be on the CIA's payroll. That all came to an end with Fidel Castro's revolution. Members of the old regime, including those involved with the mob, are rounded up.
It was bad enough that we had the Soviet Union that was this threat, but it was far away. Suddenly, it's right at our doorstep. Suddenly, that threat is something that we can actually see. And that created a tremendous amount of anxiety in Washington.
Eisenhower's Vice President, Richard Nixon, signs off on a covert CIA mission. Take out Fidel Castro.
Kennedy said, no one Kennedy wants to do. They're always moving around. They're always moving around.
Trafficante tells the agency men it can't be done like a normal mob hit.
Can't be directly coming back at us. We have to go through a third party.
The CIA is, from its very beginning, collaborating with mafiosos who are involved in the drug trade because these mafiosos will serve the larger agenda of fighting communism.
Okay, so why are you?
It's got to be quiet. An accident, this car, too flashy. It's got to be boring.
So down the hall.
Maybe drink something. People get sick all the time. The water there ain't so good, I hear.
At the agency then, and even to this day, morality sometimes has to take a back seat to whatever the final end is.
This clandestine document, the Doolittle Report, is the key to understanding the last half-century of the CIA's involvement in the drug trade. Issued in 1954, it lays out the core mission for the agency.
The Doolittle Report essentially said, we might have to bend the rules a little bit, or we might even have to break the rules in order to combat this very real threat called communism.
The CIA undertakes extortion, kidnapping, torture, even murder, plotting assassinations and coups in Iran, Indonesia, the Congo, Guatemala, and now Cuba, where the mafia are natural partners. It doesn't matter, the mafia is also America's largest supplier of illegal narcotics.
The CIA enters into a devil's bargain. When you're at war, you will do anything in the short term that it takes to win that war.
The CIA delivers the ingredients to carry out Castro's assassination.
Look at that.
A suitcase with $150,000 in cash and poison.
Trafficani agrees to do this, knowing that once you've worked for the CIA, they have two choices. They can either kill you or they can protect you. It's a business decision that has to do with the mafia's crime empire and its prospects for the future.
The plot to poison Castro coincides with the planned invasion of Cuba. The newly elected President Kennedy reluctantly signs off on the operation that will be led by a paramilitary force of Cuban exiles trained by the CIA known as Operation 40.
Operation 40, we're going to go in apart from the brigade, and they were going to knock off all the political leaders of Castro's regime.
A small group of Operation 40 commandos is headed to Cuban soil. Their goal, make contact with anti-Castro locals and then seize control of the government. One of the leaders is this man, Felix Rodriguez, the son of wealthy Cuban landowners. His uncle is Minister of Public Works under Batista. When his friends are executed in the revolution, he is one of the first to volunteer when the CIA begins forming their plan to take out Fidel Castro.
For Felix Rodriguez and the other Operation 40 guys, this was beyond just the mission of the agency. This was something that they were personally passionate about.
Rodriguez has been undercover for 6 weeks when he receives word. The invasion is on. The CIA trained troops land at the Bay of Pigs. But Castro is onto both the poison plot and the invasion plan. It's a bloodbath. Over 100 CIA-trained soldiers are killed. 1,200 are captured. But Felix Rodriguez and the other leaders of Operation 40 escape to Miami. And it's here in South Florida where many Operation 40 veterans will find a lucrative new trade.
This army of Cubans that had been trained by the CIA found themselves seriously underemployed. And they looked around. There was a great way to make money, and they had the skills for it. It was smuggling drugs.
The Bay of Pigs may have been one of history's greatest blunders, but the men behind it will play oversized roles when the Cold War and the war on drugs collide in the years to come.
You start having this boom of drugs and lawlessness in Miami, which is the very first experience of blowback from this whole Cuban fiasco.
By the end of the 60s, an estimated 20% of America's heroin and 60% of the cocaine are connected to anti-Castro operatives. The seeds of the war on drugs have been planted. Sandoz Laboratories, one of the world's leading pharmaceutical factories. Two American spies have just arrived. The mission: corner the market on the world's supply of a powerful new psychoactive drug.
The CIA saw itself as being in a kind of Cold War psychological warfare arms race with the Soviet Union.
I would like you to sign for this. Sure.
What's the answer to controlling people and brainwashing them or getting them to confess? It's drugs.
The CIA has just authorized the purchase of 10 kilograms of pure LSD-25, enough to dose more than half the population of the United States. Sandoz even supplies the CIA with the receipt and shipping information.
The CIA was scared stiff the KGB was going to get all this LSD and come over and start dosing people. So he bought every drop of LSD in existence at that point. They gave it to George White and let George start dosing people.
Tina, nothing could be sweeter. She's my little girl. My Tina, she's my little cleaner, making teeth.
George Hunter White, a larger-than-life undercover federal narcotics agent. He's known for busting international drug rings at home and abroad. But unbeknownst to his supervisors, White also works for the CIA. His job: to conduct experiments for an operation called Midnight Climax. White pays prostitutes to lure their clients to the agency's safe house.
George had a CIA safe house stocked with booze. George would sit behind this one-way mirror, drinking martinis, sitting on a portable toilet. If he had to take a leak, he didn't want to get up and leave. Hookers would bring these suckers back to the apartment. And dose them with pure LSD-25.
This is where I have my effect. In the mind.
This is lysergic acid diethylamide, better known as acid. The powerful drug was first synthesized in 1938 in Switzerland. With a dose of mere micrograms, the mind becomes confused. Perception is distorted. Personal identity is called into question. Results can be euphoric bliss or deadly panic. White observes the effects of the acid-laced cocktails on the unsuspecting men.
White was very much into S&M. He would visit prostitutes himself, and they would strap him to a bed and whip his butt.
Recognizing the bizarre behavior brought on by the drug, he gives LSD the code name Stormy. White takes meticulous notes and files his reports to his CIA handlers.
So that was how LSD was introduced to this country.
Operation Midnight Climax is part of a larger top-secret CIA program called MK Ultra. The goal: learn how to control and even reprogram people's minds. The CIA believes LSD might hold the key. Over the next 10 years, the agency doses a cross-section of the American public. Everyone from unwitting housewives to soldiers to even criminals like gangster Whitey Bulger is tested. The Allen Memorial Hospital. A psychiatric patient is being prepped for treatment. This is no ordinary mental hospital. The doctor is not looking for a cure. The patient has no idea what they are about to endure.
Just go out there.
Dr. Ewan Cameron, the former president of the American Psychiatric Association. During the Nuremberg trials, he evaluates Nazi for criminals. But Cameron has another side to him. He's fascinated by the idea that the identity can be erased and the mind reprogrammed. While George White's tests become inseparable from his own sexual obsessions, Cameron's approach is clinical and deadly serious.
Cameron was working for the CIA. They were looking into brainwashing. They were looking into mind control. They were looking into how they could create what they called Manchurian candidates.
Even his own nurses don't know he is working on a top secret CIA program.
He was doing a lot of different testing with LSD. They were trying to figure out if they could get people to go out and do things that they would ordinarily not do, like assassination.
Once the subject is dosed with a sufficient amount of LSD, Cameron begins to try and reprogram the patient's mind. He shocks them with high voltages. And forces them to listen to repetitive audio loops for days at a time.
Black, white, and war is peace. White and war is black, and white, white is black, and white, and war is black, and white, black, and white.
The drug began to take hold very rapidly. Things became very frightening, and I became more and more despondent, and that I thought I can't live like this any longer.
But not every subject in the MKUltra program finds the drug's effects so terrifying. The CIA's quest to create mind-controlled zombies is about to have an unintended consequence that will change America.
You know, what the CIA really dreamed of was sort of like a drug you could give to someone, get them to commit all sorts of unspeakable acts, and they wake up the next day and they don't remember what they've done.
Another CIA LSD experiment is underway. Volunteers have been paid $75 to participate in a research study. One of the volunteers, Ken Kesey, a young writer, wrestler, and graduate student at nearby Stanford University. He'll go on to write the bestseller, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. A nurse turns on a recording device and asks Kesey what the drug is doing to his brain.
I think it's fitting. What one? Said I have my mind. Wow, color. This is big. Colored fog of a man. I was standing at the door like some guys there when the guy's all teetering out of the bed there. And the guy's going, hey, hey man.
Would you say it was comfortable or uncomfortable?
I think it's just a good experience. I've been hoping for that kind of thing or to not that experience, but remember that there are other things I have ordinarily these before try to look for them later.
The case of MK Ultra has to be one of the craziest cases of blowback in CIA history, because here they took this drug, LSD, and thought that they were going to be able to use it to control people's minds. And the unbelievable irony is that LSD is a drug that does exactly the opposite. It frees your mind and causes people to question authority.
Within months, Kesey will be hired as a nurse's aide and given access to the hospital's supply of LSD. Perhaps the CIA never meant to turn on Ken Kesey, but they did. Soon, he is turning his friends onto acid. Then, the entire West Coast. Then, an entire generation.
It created the counterculture as we know it of the 60s. All that was a kind of blowback or backfire of the CIA's attempt to control people. Turned out to be just the opposite. It was the CIA that introduced LSD to the United States.
While LSD takes hold in the United States, in Southeast Asia, a covert CIA war will fuel a new drug epidemic: heroin. The United States is shaken to its core. JFK is shot down in the streets of Dallas, and Lyndon Johnson takes over as commander-in-chief. The war against communism in Vietnam becomes President Johnson's most pressing issue. What the American public doesn't know is just across the border from Vietnam, in Laos, more seeds are being planted for the war on drugs.
Everybody at the time was focused on Vietnam, but in nearby Laos, there was one of the hugest paramilitary covert operations going on. And President Johnson, in fact, was under a tremendous amount of pressure to keep it secret.
Local forces are waging a secret war against guerrillas in the remote Laotian highlands, and they're being trained by a legendary CIA operative, Tony Poe, a World War II fighter pilot. He earns 2 Purple Hearts in the Battle of Iwo Jima. After the war, he becomes one of America's most prolific spies. Now he's the CIA's man in Laos.
A lot of people think of someone like James Bond as the kind of spy prototype, you know, suave and wearing a tuxedo. In a place like Laos, that's not the kind of spy we were sending over there.
Tony Poe breaks CIA rules and leads a regiment to battle himself.
If you take a situation like Laos was at the time, that kind of craziness, and you insert someone like Tony Poe, that's basically like adding gas to a fire.
After the battles, he'd send these guys out to chop the ears off of these dead enemy. And then they would pack the ears up and send them back to the CIA headquarters like trophies. Another thing that they would do was chop the heads off their victims, and then they would fly over with helicopters and drop the heads like bombs on the villages.
Tony Poe's ally against communists is a powerful local warlord, Vang Pao, a resistance fighter in World War II. He now commands a ragtag army of Hmong Hill people against communists infiltrating their tribal land.
Guys like Bang Pao and a guy like Tony Poe got in business together because they had a common enemy, which was communism.
But what Poe doesn't realize is that Vang Pao is not just fighting communism, he's also lining his own pockets. Northern Laos is in the heart of the Golden Triangle, an area which includes Burma and Thailand, known as one of the most fertile opium-growing regions in the world. Here the Hmong have used opium for centuries as medicine, but on the international drug market, the real value of the poppy's sap is that it can be refined into heroin.
when the CIA is focused on a mission, on a particular end, they're not going to sit down and pontificate about what are the long-term global consequences of our actions going to be.
Tony Poe has ordered a CIA plane to drop off weapons and ammunition for the Hmong warriors and to pick up injured soldiers, women, children, and cargo. The plane is owned by Air America.
One of the most important aspects of fighting communism in Laos involved a company called Air America, which was actually a front for the CIA.
The CIA plane lands back at this secret base in the Long Chen Valley in Laos. Unmarked on any map, it's fast becoming one of the busiest airports in the world. But this plane isn't just carrying the wounded and frail. Vang Pao has begun using Air America to transport his raw opium from the hills to the cities.
The Hmong people see Americans coming and going with planes and having the resources to be able to help them transport something that's been in their culture for decades. It's a no-brainer.
The CIA built Air America to move people and weapons and money below the radar. Well, that's identical to what drug traffickers have to do. It's almost inevitable that the CIA and drug traffickers are continually crossing through the same worlds, continually using the same methods on a rather intimate basis.
The CIA turns a blind eye to Vang Pao's growing heroin operation. But Tony Poe didn't come to Laos to enrich a local drug lord.
Tony Poe hated Vang Pao because he knew he was selling drugs. Tony Poe was actually the model for Colonel Kurtz in Apocalypse Now. At one point, I was sitting talking with him, and he was running his hand over his bald head like Marlon Brando did in the movie. And I said to him, "Did you get that from Brando, or did Brando get that from you?"
In 1965, the CIA pulls Tony Poe out of Long Chen.
There are probably a lot more Tony Poes that we don't know about. People who went in believing in the higher cause and then found that there was a lot of activity that they either had to sanction or turn a blind eye to. When your moral compass starts to stray so far back and forth, you can start to lose it, as Tony Poe did.
With Tony Poe reassigned, the CIA will send in a new team to help run their secret war in Laos.
Vang Pao is now unleashed to continue his drug dealing, and that region becomes the epicenter of global heroin production.
What is going to be the theme of your, are you going to tell what's bad about LSD?
Not necessarily.
Will LSD
in evidence at the graduation ceremony? Why don't you guys come?
5 years since Ken Kesey was first introduced to LSD through the CIA's MK-Ultra mind control program. He's now a psychedelic convert, committed to spreading the LSD gospel across America. He throws parties known as acid tests, where LSD-laced Kool-Aid is served, and partygoers are invited to achieve a communal high. Meanwhile, across the country, there's a smaller but growing hippie scene, and a group of them have turned this country estate into a commune and are about to drop acid. Leading them on their acid trip is Timothy Leary. A popular lecturer at Harvard, Leary's fascinated by the effect of psychedelic drugs on the brain.
LSD was legal then, and he was giving it to graduate students to open their minds. And like Timothy Leary said, question authority. And that's when he became an outlaw.
Our aim is to transform American society. America today is an insane asylum. We're going to try to bring about a religious renaissance and a spiritual revolution.
When he urged people to take LSD, the effect that it had on people was so powerful that they'd almost treat him like a guru of sorts.
I give you.
Millbrook is a bastion of old New England. I had all these hippies coming in there, and Ken Kesey showed up there in his bus with all his merry pranksters. And that scared the hell out of this old blue-blooded WASP aristocracy that lived in Millbrook, New York.
Leary's acid crusade has made him a target. A local prosecutor is on a crusade of his own. G. Gordon Liddy, a former FBI agent turned assistant district attorney in Dutchess County, New York.
Gordon Liddy was an obscure anti-drug right-wing prosecutor in Dutchess County, New York, until he took on Timothy Leary and the LSD movement.
No one was as determined to take Leary down as G. Gordon Liddy. He just went after Leary with a vengeance.
Inside, the officers find hippies tripping on LSD, watching a loop of a waterfall.
Where's Larry? Leary was into disrupting the normal culture of America, and with LSD. That scared the hell out of this old blue-blooded WASP aristocracy that lived in a place like Millbrook, New York.
Liddy's men find a stash of LSD and some marijuana. But Liddy can only arrest Leary for marijuana possession because LSD is still legal. The marijuana charges against Timothy Leary are dropped when it's revealed G. Gordon Liddy failed to read him his rights. But Liddy doesn't give up. He continues a relentless campaign against Leary, tracking his moves over the course of the next year. Worn down by Liddy's crusade, in 1967, Leary leaves Millbrook in the East Coast and heads west, where the LSD-fueled counterculture is in full swing. Despite the fact it was the CIA that first introduced LSD to America, the drug is now in the hands of a group that's increasingly seen as a threat.
Young people, they were fighting for racial justice and equality. They were fighting against the Vietnam War. They were seriously opposing the government. And the drugs were at the forefront.
There was this propaganda that the hippies, Timothy Leary, and LSD were all part of a communist conspiracy.
LSD begins to be distributed by an underground organization called the Brotherhood of Eternal Love.
Well, the Brotherhood of Eternal Love was actually a organization
Something has gone awry with the video feed. I'm not sure what it is, but it's like behaving in a strange way at the moment. I don't know what the problem is. See if I can page. Maybe that will solve the problem.
To take LSD, the effect that it had on people was so powerful that they almost treat him like a guru of sorts.
Millbrook is a bastion of old New England. I had all these hippies coming in there, and Ken Kesey showed up there in his bus with all his merry pranksters, and that scared the hell out of this old blue-blooded WASP aristocracy that lived in Millbrook, New York.
Leary's acid crusade has made him a target. A local prosecutor is on a crusade of his own. G. Gordon Liddy, a former FBI agent turned assistant district attorney in Dutchess County, New York.
Gordon Liddy was an obscure anti-drug right-wing prosecutor in Dutchess County, New York, until he took on Timothy Leary and the LSD movement.
No one was as determined to take Leary down as G. Gordon Liddy. He just went after Leary with a vengeance.
Go, go, go! Keep your eyes open! Watch out for trucks! Inside, the officers find hippies tripping on LSD, watching a loop of a waterfall.
Are you on drugs? Are you on drugs? Where's Leary?
Leary was into disrupting the normal culture of America, and with LSD.
Hands in the air! Get up against the wall!
That scared the hell out of this old blue-blooded WASP aristocracy that lived in a place like Millbrook, New York.
Liddy's men find a stash of LSD and some marijuana. But Liddy can only arrest Leary for marijuana possession because LSD is still legal. The marijuana charges against Timothy Leary are dropped when it's revealed G. Gordon Liddy failed to read him his rights. But Liddy doesn't give up. He continues a relentless campaign against Leary, tracking his moves over the course of the next year. Worn down by Liddy's crusade, in 1967, Leary leaves Millbrook in the East Coast and heads west, where the LSD-fueled counterculture is in full swing. Despite the fact it was the CIA that first introduced LSD to America, the drug is now in the hands of a group that's increasingly seen as a threat.
Young people, they were fighting for racial justice and equality. They were fighting against the Vietnam War. They were seriously opposing the government. And the drugs were at the forefront.
There was this propaganda that the hippies, Timothy Leary, and LSD were all part of a communist conspiracy.
LSD begins to be distributed by an underground organization called the Brotherhood of Eternal Love.
Well, the Brotherhood of Eternal Love was actually an organization of hippie mafia drug dealers, dealing specifically in black Afghani hash and then later LSD.
To keep the sale of LSD flowing, the Brotherhood will need a brand ambassador who encompasses everything the organization stands for.
Turn on, tune in, drop out.
Timothy Leary's attention-grabbing antics make him the perfect public face for the movement.
It was really kind of a political, social movement. But in order to keep that movement going, you need money.
Fortunately for the Brotherhood, Leary has brought with him a rich and connected friend. William Mellon Hitchcock, playboy millionaire, owner of the Millbrook estate where Leary was arrested.
Billy Hitchcock was the scion of one of the most famous old Welsh families. His father was the model for Tom Buchanan in Scott Fitzgerald's Great Gatsby. So for the son, Billy Hitchcock to now team up with Timothy Leary was a big scandal.
Hitchcock begins to help bankroll the Brotherhood's mass production of acid.
It was never about the money, but it was always about the money.
As an entire generation looks for ways to expand their consciousness, the Brotherhood of Eternal Love moves in to fill the void.
LSD has escaped from the lab. You've got Leary espousing turn on, tune in, and drop out. Huge cultural changes that were taking place in the country.
To a rock and roll radio station, you bet.
The Haight-Ashbury Free Clinic, a haven amidst the chaos of San Francisco's streets. This man has just taken acid for the first time, and he's having a bad trip. The doctor treating him keeps detailed notes, but who he's working for is a secret no one in San Francisco knows. Colonel James Ketchum, a psychiatrist in the Pentagon's top-secret psychochemical warfare program. He's obsessed with finding the key to manipulating the mind of the enemy. And like the CIA's MK-Ultra program, he's willing to do whatever it takes to find the answers he's looking for. Here at the Edgewood Arsenal, Ketchum first puts his LSD research to the test. After ingesting LSD, volunteers are instructed to perform basic military tasks.
The confused volunteer needed help as he attempted to traverse part of an obstacle course. Influenced by an obvious lack of purpose, the drugged volunteer made no effort to traverse the trail of tires, and in obvious confusion, wandered aimlessly through the woods.
Other trials move into more dangerous territory, pushing the soldiers to the limits of sanity.
How do you feel right now?
Can't figure it out.
It's hard to figure out.
It's hard to figure it out. I don't see it. I don't believe it. I feel it.
You know,
Reaper!
Many of these soldiers have been offered a powerful incentive to take part in the program. Time away from combat duty in Vietnam. Just over the border in Laos, the CIA's Air America airline is increasingly becoming part of the international drug trade.
When those planes were returning to American bases, they were often used to bring back some of the bounty of Laos. And that bounty was heroin.
In the remote highlands of Laos, Communist forces are increasingly threatening to overtake the territory controlled by CIA ally Vang Pao.
The situation in Laos really called for extraordinary means conducted by extraordinary men.
The CIA has sent in a veteran spy to run the Laos operation. Ted Shackley, known as the Blonde Ghost. Former head of the CIA's top-secret Miami station, where the CIA ran failed missions to kill Fidel Castro, which included poisoned milkshakes and exploding cigars. Now he's here fighting another secret war.
The CIA itself was under a tremendous amount of pressure to accomplish this mission to fight communism.
750 is Carberry inbound.
To help finance his war, Vang Pao has been using Air America to traffic heroin. But with the war raging, Shackley and the CIA don't just turn a blind eye to the drug trafficking. The U.S. provides Vang Pao 2 transport planes. Now he's able to fly his opium directly to his refineries. One right on the American air base.
The CIA, at the same time it was fighting, in its mind, a very successful anti-communist war, was also standing up an army of drug smugglers.
Vang Pao is fast on his way to becoming the biggest heroin trafficker in the world. And he's got a growing customer base just over the border in Vietnam.
One side effect of this covert war in Laos is that there's a lot of heroin in the theater of war, and many American troops get addicted.
One of my fellow soldiers was found dead after a firefight. We thought he had been shot, and actually he had the needle stuck in his arm.
Heroin, a highly addictive opioid, extracted from the poppy plant and synthesized from morphine. Once ingested, morphine molecules rush opioid receptors in the brainstem that controls the body's survival functions. It can lead to intoxicating highs or shut down the respiratory system and lead to death.
The rule was you don't get high while on patrol, but you can't control depression. We were wet during the monsoon season 24/7. The miserable life we lived, we were homesick.
As the war progresses, 2 GIs are overdosing every day.
Et maintenant, Charleston, présenté également par le groupe chorégraphique du Moulin Rouge.
A nightclub in Saigon, a refuge from the horrors of combat. Sitting at the back of the club is a man well known to the CIA, mobster Santo Trafficante Jr.
Trafficante had assured protection back in 1960. He was involved in these plots to kill Castro. Once you've worked for the CIA, you're what they called in that business a $1 million man.
Trafficante is meeting with a Corsican gangster, a middleman for another CIA-connected drug trafficker, Vang Pao. They are discussing a deal that'll bring tons of heroin into the United States.
With the booming heroin trade, which was because of the influx of American troops, Trafficante had to go out there and make sure that his family got its fair share.
The deal allows Trafficante to ramp up his operation. Soon as couriers are trafficking Vang Pao's heroin from refineries in Hong Kong via South America and the Caribbean onto the United States. In one shipment alone, they smuggle in as much as 20% of all the heroin consumed that year.
The history of the CIA is really the history of unintended consequences and blowback. With CIA secret wars being fought in places like Laos, they became instrumental in flooding America with drugs.
By 1970, New York City alone will have over 200,000 heroin addicts.
A lot of people came back who had served in Vietnam addicted to drugs. It doesn't help that the economy is also declining, depressing situation for a young person who's just spent a year, maybe 2 years in a terrible and confusing war.
With the demand for heroin rising, a new breed of homegrown dealers emerges. One of these dealers has just arrived to check on his operation. These women are part of a production line that runs 24 hours a day. They're made to work in the nude so they can't steal the product. Pure, uncut heroin that's sold by this man.
I said we gonna make some money today or what?
Frank Matthews. Born in rural North Carolina. His first arrest comes at 14 when he's busted for leading a gang of chicken thieves. He moves to Brooklyn, where he opens a barbershop as a front for selling heroin.
The heroin business has always been controlled by organized crime. And then along comes a guy named Frank Matthews.
All day.
At any given time, hundreds of pounds of heroin are being diluted and packaged.
He actually had two places in Brooklyn, the Ponderosa and the OK Corral. The thing that fascinates me is, how could you operate two drug mills like this, busting in 40 women every day, and not anybody getting suspicious?
With a nearly unlimited supply of heroin coming in from Southeast Asia, Matthews begins building an empire that stretches the length of the eastern seaboard west of St. Louis. They call him Black Caesar.
That's what I'm talking about.
Frank Matthews became one of the biggest heroin distributors in the world.
But with the thousands of addicts that come with every new deal, Matthews will find himself in the crosshairs of a very powerful enemy. The newly elected president, Richard Milhous Nixon.
When Nixon came into the White House, it was essentially to clean up this chaos and anarchy in the streets and to impose law and order. There was this legitimate fear that heroin was going to take over and destroy the United States.
The grand opening of an exclusive resort, Paradise Island in the Bahamas. The crowd celebrating New Year's Eve is a star-studded collection of Hollywood actors, politicians, and wealthy investors.
People look back in the 60s and they, oh, it was great, the music was great, rock and roll, but then it started to change. 68 was like a turning point. Martin Luther King was assassinated. Bobby Kennedy was assassinated. It was the end of the hippie era of the 60s where it was all about peace, love, and brotherhood. Things were starting to turn dark.
It's been a good year for at least one of the partygoers, the president-elect Richard Nixon. Richard Milhous Nixon is no stranger to the White House. He served 2 terms as vice president under Eisenhower, where he signed off on the secret plan to assassinate Fidel Castro. He narrowly lost to Kennedy in 1960. By the time he runs for president again, crime rates are skyrocketing, and he appeals to what he calls the silent majority.
These besieged middle-class suburbanites who fear what at that time seems to be a society going through really profound and negative changes.
At Paradise Island, it all seems a world away. But Nixon has no idea he's celebrating alongside one of his counterculture enemies. William Hitchcock is the millionaire playboy and sometimes financier of the Brotherhood of Eternal Love. He's also invested the equivalent of $35 million in today's dollars in Paradise Island. But Hitchcock is not the only one at this party moving large sums of cash to the Bahamas.
You could take as much money as you wanted in cash and deposit it in banks down there in the Bahamas and launder it. Next thing you know, wired back into a bank account in the United States, and nobody would ever know that it came as a result of illegal activity.
The Bahamas is full of banks that launder dirty money, but none will become as infamous as the Castle Bank and Trust. Founded by a former CIA spy, its clients include celebrities like John Fogerty, Tony Curtis, and Hugh Hefner. But Castle serves another purpose.
Money that was coming from the drug business was deposited in these banks and then used to finance covert CIA operations.
Drug trafficking is really all about laundering money. And it turns out that so is being a CIA officer, because everything the CIA does has to be secret. And in order to be secret, you have to launder your money.
Even the president-elect banks at Castle. While Hitchcock is celebrating in the Bahamas, back in California, another of his investments is working around the clock. In this makeshift lab, the Brotherhood of Eternal Love is producing a potent new brand of LSD that they hope will stamp out all competition. It'll become the most famous acid ever produced. They call it Orange Sunshine.
Orange Sunshine, after Sandoz LSD-25, was the purest LSD manufactured in the world. Steve Jobs dropped acid. The Grateful Dead. It infiltrated music, business. Orange Sunshine was all over the country.
In the coming months, Hitchcock's lab will produce 10 million hits, enough to dose the entire population of New York City and LA.
I figured out where we could load the water supply with a 55-gallon drum of acid. Timothy Leary stopped us. Timothy said, "Thou shalt not alter thy brother's consciousness without his permission." Wow. That's Timothy Leary. Timothy Leary wasn't promoting, go give everybody acid. We were. Everyone should take LSD.
But soon, the luck of Orange Sunshine's most famous advocate will run out. A cop on the night shift makes a routine traffic stop. The driver is LSD evangelist Timothy Leary.
The police searched the car, and in the ashtray was a joint and a roach. And they busted Timothy for a minute amount of pot.
Shortly after his arrest, he makes a surprise announcement.
I'm going to run for the governorship of the state of California. I think that we need a new party, and by party, I mean party.
Leary's platform included, among other things, banning football, banning all money, creating a barter system that would kind of take over capitalism. The song Come Together, which was written by John Lennon, was actually a campaign song for Timothy Leary.
Let the kids get high. As a matter of fact, President Nixon, why not we all turn on together?
his Republican opponent, Ronald Reagan.
There is nothing smart, there's nothing grown up or sophisticated in taking an LSD trip at all. They're just being complete fools.
When anti-war protesters descended on Washington and protested Nixon's policies, Nixon probably could smell the marijuana smoke wafting in through the windows of the White House. And so Nixon associated marijuana with his political opponents.
But in the Nixon administration, Leary's old nemesis, G. Gordon Liddy, has been brought in by the Treasury Department to hatch a plan to clamp down on drugs.
And then try and cover that section of the border. Okay? Sounds good.
G. Gordon Liddy was the law and order figure in the White House. And when Nixon was elected into the White House, Nixon saw and Liddy saw that drugs were this powerful hot button issue.
Liddy launches Operation Intercept, shutting down the entire 2,000-mile border with Mexico, cutting off the source of most of America's marijuana. For over 20 days, all vehicles crossing the border are searched. It's the largest operation of its kind in history.
The interesting thing about the very beginning of the war on drugs, many of these acts were completely symbolic. It actually had no impact whatsoever on the drug trade in the U.S.
A few marijuana smugglers may have been apprehended, but the most successful trackers in America are not waiting in line at the Mexican border. A small private plane is losing altitude fast. The pilot, Juan Restoy, a former Cuban politician who fought against Fidel Castro, now a key player in the nation's largest narcotics distribution network.
In 1970, there was a plane crash in California. Juan Restoy was flying this plane. Turns out that this guy was a veteran of the Bay of Pigs operation and a CIA operative.
We just dropped me a Skyway, advantage there.
Restoy survives, but the crash catches the attention of federal agents working on Operation Eagle, a national investigation of narcotics smuggling.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for being here. The Attorney General will have a statement, and I introduce to you now the Attorney General of the United States.
We have called all of you this morning to tell you about Operation Eagle, which is the code name for the biggest operation of its kind in history. At 10 a.m. last night, special agents of the Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs made simultaneous raids in Miami, New York, and Chicago, and 7 other cities. We are very pleased to report that the raids have already resulted in the arrest of 123 defendants.
What Attorney General John Mitchell neglects to mention is as many as 70% of those arrested are Cubans who fought for the CIA against Fidel Castro. The agency's secret war against communism has given rise to an entire generation of drug traffickers.
Cuban exiles trained by the CIA for the Bay of Pigs had all these skills in radios, flying airplanes, boats, and applied these skills to smuggling drugs.
crackdown on drugs begins to attract unlikely allies. Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, has seen better days. Elvis has developed a prescription drug habit that includes uppers, downers, and needles. Doctors are on call to provide an endless supply of drugs.
At the time, Elvis Presley was essentially a stone junkie. He also was obsessed with firearms. He actually wanted to obtain a drug agent badge from Nixon so he could safely travel the world with his drugs and firearms. Elvis wrote this rambling letter requesting a visit with Nixon, expressed all these concerns, and the communists in the entertainment industry, the un-American people, foreign acts like the Beatles that were coming over to our country and subverting clean-cut American youth.
The letter works, and Nixon agrees to meet. Being seen with the rock and roll legend makes for a public relations coup for the president. But it's also part of a larger strategy.
If you look at the wider framed photos, there's Elvis Presley, there's President Nixon, and there's this young man wearing glasses. And he was this White House high-end political fixer. And his name was Eagle Bud Crow.
Eagle Bud Crow. As Nixon's deputy of domestic affairs, he'll help hire G. Gordon Liddy, and they will spearhead policies that will lead to the declaration of the war on drugs.
And that's why Bud Crow brought in Elvis Presley. He was the drug guy.
Elvis gets his badge, but there's no record of the king ever performing any drug busts. Meanwhile, at a state prison in California, one of Nixon's political enemies is beginning a sentence for a small amount of marijuana. Timothy Leary's run for governor has been cut short. But the underground hippie organization, the Brotherhood of Eternal Love, doesn't want their LSD guru to die behind bars.
Timothy was one of us. So Timothy being in prison, we weren't going to let him down.
Brotherhood was extremely well financed. So the Brotherhood hires the Weathermen to break Leary out of prison.
Launched by radical students in 1968, the Weather Underground has turned into a violent revolutionary organization, carrying out bombings across the United States. For a rumored $20,000 fee, the Weather Underground breaks Timothy Leary out of prison.
After they break him out of prison, he ends up in Algeria. While he's in Algeria, he hooks up with Eldridge Cleaver and a lot of the Black Panthers who were also on the lam.
It's an audacious move, but the Brotherhood doesn't lay low for the rest of 1970. One of their associates will attempt one of the most brazen drug distribution stunts of all time. Laguna Beach, California. 25,000 young people have gathered for an outdoor rock concert to celebrate the counterculture.
The idea initially was just to have a Woodstock-type rock concert, but some of the local artists decided that it would be better to give a kind of a spiritual connotation to try to avoid any unnecessary law enforcement scrutiny, but it became completely out of control.
One of the Brotherhood of Eternal Love's associates has hired a private plane, and it's flying towards the festival.
The plane flew over the Christmas happening. It dropped thousands of Christmas cards, and in the middle was a tab of orange sunshine.
It's just a legendary moment in the countercultural history of the United States, an actual acid drop from the sky on a huge crowd of young Americans.
Over the past decade, secret government drug tests and covert CIA operations have unleashed a wave of drugs into the United States. It's fueled the counterculture and increasingly anarchy in the streets.
The economy's starting to falter. There's riots in the major cities of the United States. So all these things are coming to a boiling point. The Nixon administration is looking at this and going, my God, what are we going to do? We can put the controls back on our society that seems to be out of control. We're going to declare a war on drugs.
June 17th, 1971, President Richard Nixon is about to make one of the most important speeches in presidential history.
You want to join me here? Won't you be seated, please, ladies and gentlemen? Come on, Dr. Jaffe. Really? Fine. Fine.
Standing next to the president, 31-year-old drug policy guru Bud Krogh. Standing to his left, his boss, Nixon's chief counsel, John Ehrlichman.
Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to summarize for you the meeting that I have just had with the bipartisan leaders, which began at 8 o'clock and was completed 2 hours later. America's public enemy number one in the United States is drug abuse. In order to fight and defeat this enemy, it is necessary to wage a new all-out offensive. This will be a worldwide offensive. Fundamentally, it is essential for the American people to be alerted to this danger, to recognize that it is a danger that will not pass with the passing of the war in Vietnam, which has brought to our attention the fact that a number of young Americans have become addicts as they serve abroad. This offensive deals with the problem there, but will then go on to deal with the problem throughout America.
President Nixon never actually uses the word, but for everyone listening, it's clear Richard Nixon is declaring a war on drugs.
The briefing team will now be ready to answer any questions on the technical details of the program.
Nixon proclaiming this war on drugs is this epic moment. Nixon standing up as the law and order president.
We'll proceed in about 5 minutes.
Nixon has launched one of the most expensive and politically complicated initiatives ever attempted. But behind the scenes, there's another agenda at work.
In the eyes of the inner circle of the Nixon administration, the war on drugs brought together the peace movement, the hippies, the counterculture, African Americans. All of this stuff can be captured and addressed by force with law enforcement under the rubric of the war on drugs. And the trick is to create a system that deals with this without appearing to.
This announcement this morning is the culmination of a project that began about a year ago.
It'll be decades before one of Nixon's top advisors will allegedly admit to a magazine writer this deception behind the origin of the war on drugs.
The Nixon campaign had two enemies, the anti-war left and black people. We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or black, but by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and the blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did.
We got a problem with the blacks. We got a problem with the hippies. What are we going to do? We're going to declare a war on drugs. And we criminalize these elements, and we broadcast it all over the nightly news. We can put the controls back on our society that seems to be out of control.
Right. Okay. Fine.
Nixon soon finds himself increasingly frustrated by the war on drugs' lack of progress and grills his inner circle for answers.
Are we properly organized?
In terms of our being properly organized right now, quite honestly, we're not.
We have 350,000 police officers in the United States. Their resources are not being utilized.
How many of them are involved in? Isn't there quite a bit of corruption in many of the police departments in major cities? We read a lot about this. If we talk about respect for law, you've got to have law that deserves respect.
Inner cities are increasingly in the grip of a heroin epidemic. Drug-related deaths are up to 1,000 a year in New York City alone. Junkies steal to finance their addictions, and police corruption is rampant. NYPD narcotics detective Frank Serpico tells the Mayor's Commission that cops are paying off their superiors for a transfer to the narcotics division.
I saw what was going on. Being transferred to the Gold Coast, as it was called, where there was big money, of course, narcotics was where the money was. Cops would notify drug dealers whenever some other cops were going to raid their place. There was no limit. There was no morality.
Cops are also putting drugs on the street. In one of the strangest coincidences in the war on drugs, fact will collide with fiction. A movie called The French Connection is a favorite for an Academy Award. It tells the story of an NYPD 1962 bust of the famous French Connection heroin smuggling network, run by gangsters like Santo Trafficante.
So this great movie comes out, The French Connection. Gene Hackman plays the narcotics cop who made the big French Connection bust.
For 10 years, the confiscated heroin is thought to be held in a secure Manhattan police lockup.
So they had all this heroin that they busted, and it was in the property vault in NYPD custody.
Open them up.
But when they ultimately went down there to get it,
we got a problem.
They found it was gone.
Large amounts of heroin from the famous French Connection busts have been stolen from the police evidence room and replaced with flour.
$70 million worth of heroin goes from NYPD into the streets of New York City. And they couldn't figure out, well, what happened? Of course, we know what happened. The cops stole it. And amazingly, as people are sitting there watching the movie French Connection, that heroin was on the streets of New York being sold to dealers and drug addicts.
The French Connection heroin robbery remains the single largest theft in American history, and it was done by the police themselves.
The French heroin was big. It corrupted New York City. It corrupted the New York cops. It corrupted everybody.
While drugs are corrupting the nation's police, the White House itself will soon be engulfed in its own criminal conspiracy.
Abort. I repeat, abort. Get out of there. Hello? Hello?
Good evening. We have a mystery story out of Washington. 5 people have been arrested and charged with breaking into the headquarters of the Democratic National Committee in the middle of the night.
1 year to the day after President Nixon declares a war on drugs, his law and order presidency is about to unravel. One of Nixon's top lieutenants, G. Gordon Liddy, is arrested for trying to break into the Democratic National Committee's headquarters. When his 5 burglars are interrogated, it's revealed they're part of a secret White House team that includes an ex-CIA officer and 4 former anti-Castro operatives. As Congress begins hearings investigating just how high the plot goes,
Mr. Ehrlichman, are you telling me that the break-in to Dr. Fielding's office was to satisfy the President of the United States?
Across the country, another kind of conspiracy is brewing. A casino in Vegas. The East Coast's biggest heroin dealer is enjoying a run on the roulette table.
Frank Matthews was ahead of his time because he was the Al Capone of African-American drug dealing.
But Frank Matthews is not in town just to gamble. The drug trade is changing, and he wants to find a way to stop the growing violence. Just recently, one of Matthews' top dealers was gunned down in a popular nightclub.
Do it. Yo, good?
So he's called a summit of the country's top black drug lords.
A lot of people in law enforcement will tell you that when the mob was in control of the neighborhoods, there was a lot less crime.
The days of sharing with the Italians, they're over now. Y'all hear me? Over. This is our time now. This is our time.
Now you had the emergence of these gangs that were cutting out the mob. It created these turf wars and these battles.
What I'm saying first, though, we got to stick together, though.
Without killing each other.
His objective was to form some kind of network where they can work together rather than kill each other.
This business is ours now, all the way. That's it. That's it.
But before he can see his dreams of unity fulfilled, he's arrested in Vegas.
Matthews jumped bail on July 2nd, 1973, and has never been seen again.
To add to the mystery, the testimony of 9 of his French Connection suppliers is suppressed for national security reasons by the CIA.
Frank Matthews may be one of the few of the big drug kingpins who actually got away. But unlike Matthews, most of the guys who were involved in the drug trade were getting hammered with these huge sentences.
Possibly the most enduring legacy of Nixon's war on drugs is a series of laws passed in New York State.
Life sentence for pushers.
We saw guys coming in who were like low-level street dealers with 20, 30 years' time.
Under what are known as the Rockefeller drug laws, anyone caught with more than 4 ounces of drugs, even marijuana, faces a 15-year to life sentence. It's the same as second-degree murder. Other states soon follow suit.
Rockefeller drug laws reverberate to this day because 90% of the people who were arrested under those laws were black and brown.
But for the man who declared America's war on drugs, the battle has come to an early end.
The irony of Nixon championing a war on drugs is his own criminality. The guy leaves office in disgrace.
For their roles in the Watergate scandal, 4 of the key architects of the war on drugs will go to prison. The former Attorney General who spearheaded Operation Eagle, John Mitchell. The senior advisor who introduced Nixon to Elvis, Bud Krogh. The president's chief counsel, John Ehrlichman. And the former prosecutor who first made his name trying to take down LSD guru Timothy Leary, G. Gordon Liddy, will be sent to a Connecticut federal prison. And it's here where one of the strangest connections in the history of the war on drugs will be made. The federal prison at Danbury, Connecticut, 1974. Richard Nixon's dirty tricks mastermind, G. Gordon Liddy, is here serving time for his role in the Watergate break-in.
When Gordon Liddy found himself in federal prison, he found a fellow inmate there, Carlos Lader.
Carlos Lader, a Colombian car thief who will soon change the face of the drug trade.
Liddy had all these ideas about the will to power, to impose your will on circumstances and do heroic things as an individual. Later was completely inspired by this man. This weird admiration society built up. Carlos later started dressing like him, started talking about the same ideas, and Carlos later would then get out and basically flood America with cocaine.
And as a founding member of Pablo Escobar's Medellin cartel, he'll revolutionize a new drug trade. The power dynamics that forged the war on drugs will now reverberate across 5 decades.
Sometimes people say that the war on drugs really wasn't about drugs, and they state that like that's news.
He's up in the corner.
It's only news to people who just haven't been paying attention. Of course it wasn't about drugs.
There was a fraud. It was a political maneuvering that was designed to keep certain aspects of the culture under control.
In many ways, the counterculture was a product of the CIA LSD program that released it into the populace. All of these individual experiences that people had taking LSD collectively completely altered society.
What's really remarkable is that a lot of these patterns that have their origins in the 1960s become cyclical.
Virtually all of the CIA activities abroad always came on the backs of drug smuggling and drug financing.
And we're going to see those relationships develop again and again throughout the war on drugs.
The war on drugs is not about one thing. It's about many things in relationship to each other.
On the next episode of America's War on Drugs.
Pablo Escobar had tremendous political ambition.
All right, so a lot of that I was familiar with, but some of those details I was not previously familiar with, so that was pretty informative for me. Back to issues that an individual might have to deal with regarding law enforcement. If an officer has reason to believe that a crime is being committed, the officer may very well initiate the search process and let the lawyers settle the legal issues later. So as far as expectations for privacy, for your home, a search warrant is usually required unless there is evidence of a major and immediate threat to public safety. Most officers ask permission to search a car before doing so, but they can stop and hold someone just on the belief that a crime is being committed. If an officer has a reason to suspect that a crime has been or is being committed, they can stop and detain. If permission to search is not given, they can hold you while a drug dog is summoned. Your least expectation of privacy is out and about in public. Out in public, just mere suspicion is enough for a police officer in most cases to stop and justify a search. So misdemeanors are minor crimes, felonies are major crimes by definition. Typically with misdemeanors, you get shorter prison sentences, typically less than a year in most cases. Felonies, on the other hand, like I said, these are major crimes, and the level of punishment at the felony level is, in terms of drug distribution, is going to be based upon the amount of drug that an individual possesses or distributes. It is an offense which carries a sentence in excess of a year, by the way. Any felony is going to have a prison sentence greater than 1 year. Intent to distribute is something that you could always be charged with by an officer if you have a drug in your possession. It's not intent to sell, it's intent to distribute. You know, even giving a drug away to a friend as a gift could result in an intent to distribute charge. So being around other drug dealers is very legally risky and often physically risky too for your physical safety. But in terms of conspiracy, conspiracy laws are broad, powerful laws affecting people peripheral to the planning of a crime who may not even have participated in the crime, but were just around the people when they were doing it, will often get charged under conspiracy laws. And oftentimes there's a hope that people who were bystanders that get charged with conspiracy laws, in order to get out of their charges, often they'll cooperate with the courts to give their testimony in exchange to, escape the charges typically, in order to convict the bigger fish. Another thing, civil forfeiture laws around the country allow law enforcement officers to confiscate or seize property that was used during the commission of a crime, like vehicles, for example, and other forms of electronic equipment. Police departments have obtained a lot of vehicles from drug dealers over the years. A lot of confiscated property also will get auctioned off at some point by police departments. So possession is an offense by a person who did not manufacture, distribute, or sell a controlled substance, but only held the substance for personal use. The prosecutor must clearly establish whether the accused had actual knowledge of the drug, whether the seized material is actually a controlled substance under Florida law, and whether or not the accused actually had control over the drug. In the case of possession with intent to sell, whether all elements of possession were present, as well as whether there is proof of the accused. In the case of possession with intent to sell, whether all elements of possession were present, as well as whether or not there is proof of the accused's intent, are large components of that legal decision. Drug convictions may also bring probation and suspension of the driver's license, as well as ineligibility for some types of government employment, ineligibility for some forms of college financial aid, the inability to obtain a state license or certification in many fields, the inability to qualify for public housing, the inability to obtain employment, and significant damage to a person's reputation, particularly if you're a convicted felon. So, we're talking probation. This slide is repetitive. Okay. All right. So Florida disenfranchisement laws have been on the books since 1868. They were implemented following the Civil War to restrict the voting rights of felons, a disproportionate number of whom, even today, are African American. Amendment 4 in November 2018 restored voting rights to over 1 million ex-felons in the state of Florida. They still cannot vote if they were convicted of murder or a sex offense. Also, Amendment 4 only applies to the restoration of voting rights. Serving on a jury, holding public office, or possessing a firearm will have to be addressed by further legislation. In March of 2019, a state law was passed that limits Amendment 4. That law requires former felons to either pay all fees that they owe as part of their case or get their sentence modified in order to register to vote. At the time of its passing, this law prevented nearly 775,000 felons from voting. This was under appeal to the 11th Circuit Court, and I'm not sure actually what ended up happening with that, because my notes on this are actually a little bit dated. So that's something I need to follow up on myself. When an application for any form of clemency is received in the Office of Executive Clemency, it is screened for eligibility regarding the required timeframes for the various offenses, and the accompanying required certified court documents are reviewed. If an applicant is found eligible, the applicant is forwarded to the investigative phase of the process and the Office of Clemency Investigations. Cases are then assigned to examiners in the field offices on a first in, first out basis. If the Office of Executive Clemency determines that an application does not meet the requirements, the applicant is advised of the disqualifying issues and guidance is provided as to the next step. After the investigation and report is prepared, the eligible applications are forwarded to the Clemency Board for a decision. So the Clemency Board is made up of the governor himself and 3 other officials. They currently meet 4 times a year, and the process typically takes around 5 years for most applicants and can take up to 14 years. Of the 1.5 million felons who have lost their civil rights, 30,000 have applied for restoration. All right. So penalty laws have been developed for years and are very complicated. Knowing what the prosecuting attorney will charge you with is dependent on 3 things: the latest changes in the law, attitude that the prosecutor is taking towards drug crimes. So, yeah, you heard that right, like the individual personality of whoever the prosecutor is, and whether that individual will be charged under state or federal statutes. Some states and the federal system have structured or guideline sentencing. In Florida, this is used. In Florida, this used to be the 10-20 life law regarding using a gun in the commission of a felony. Pull a gun 10 years, fire a gun 20 years, shoot somebody, life. That law was repealed in 2016. The Justice Safety Valve Act is legislation that has been proposed repeatedly over the years that hasn't really gone anywhere. But basically, it's a piece of proposed federal legislation that would give judges a little bit more latitude about sentencing when it comes to drug offenses. And it would allow judges in some cases to implement sentences below the mandatory minimums for some drug cases. So this proposed updated, quote, safety valve would apply to any federal conviction that has been prescribed a mandatory minimum sentence. As written, it would not apply retroactively. Inmates already serving a mandatory minimum sentence would not be allowed to request a lesser sentence or resentencing based on the act. It would only apply to federal sentencing. So the future of this act still remains with Congress. I see we have some comments coming in here. Yes, I'm a little behind on creating the study guide for the exam, but my goal is to have a study guide published by the end of the day tomorrow. So, we have a lot of people imprisoned in the United States. And the data in this slide were given to me by Darlene Mosley, who is another faculty member who teaches this course. And I've actually been meaning to check to see how up to date and how much I might need to be updating some of these data here soon. But you can see the general trend of incarceration rates around different demographics in this slide. And this is just a pretty simple slide that just shows just how far beyond we are other countries when it comes to locking people up. Our incarceration rates in the United States are well beyond any other developed nation out there. So racial and ethnic disparities, of course, in our criminal justice system, this has been a topic that has received quite a bit of attention from sociologists and criminologists over the years. And depending upon the political winds in Washington, D.C., it will receive attention from the federal government and various points. People will try to make an effort to tackle this in various ways, but again, a lot of it depends upon politics and who's in power, and various factors that can be quite chaotic, right? So that's it for the material in this course. We have made it to the end of all the material that I have to cover for you guys. And I had to take some Sudafed earlier, and I get the worst dry mouth when I'm on pseudoephedrine, which is actually a pretty potent stimulant too. So I'll probably have insomnia tonight, which, I'll get some work done if that's the case, but dries my mouth out immensely. Hence all the water I've been drinking. Did anyone have any other concerns that they needed to discuss with me before we call it a night and call it a class? And I see you guys Thursday for the final exam. Again, I do plan to have a study guide put out by the end of the day tomorrow. So I will put out an announcement when I have the study guide posted. As far as essay grades, I can't give you a precise time when your essay grades will be posted, but I can say that that final grades are due for me. I have to get them turned in, in the not too distant future myself. So I'm certainly not dilly-dallying when it comes to my grading. It's something that I'm actively working on. I've got a lot of assignments from a lot of classes that I'm grading, but I do anticipate that your essays should probably be graded by the beginning of the week, Monday at the latest. I would expect as maybe like and maybe I'll have it done sooner than that, but I would think probably by around Monday I'll have them graded at the latest. Have a good night, Emily. And have a good night, everyone. And live long and prosper. May I turn my essay in tomorrow? Yeah, just go ahead and get it turned in tomorrow, and maybe put a note on your submission. You know what you just said to me now. Just put it as a side note on your submission and remind me, and I will waive that late penalty if you can get it in by tomorrow. Well, if there's no one else that needs anything else addressed, good evening and good night.